Hello, and welcome to the new Mindscape. In this video, I'm going to be talking about funerals. Now, most of us, in the life that we live in today's world, we avoid thinking about death and talking about death and dealing with death. And so it's when funerals occur that, in fact, that's the time when we are really faced with the issues of death. So I'm going to talk a little bit about funerals. When somebody dies, people say that they've left this world and they've moved to another world or to another dimension. In other words, this is a passage from one state to another state. And this makes me think of the anthropological concept of the rite of passage. Now, the idea of a rite of passage is that in life, we go through some important changes. And these passages aren't only something that we undergo as an individual. Actually, they're social passages. In each of these passages, we usually have some kind of ritual or ceremony. Actually, the first big change that we undergo in life is when we're born. We pass out from the mother's womb and we come into this world. So that's our first big passage. And another passage is that in different cultures and religions, we have initiations or rites of passage in youth. So, for example, we have baptism and high school graduation. So these ceremonies that are associated with moving from childhood to an older stage of youth. When you're 18 years old, for example, you attend high school graduation. High school graduation is often the passage from being a child to being an adult. Your social status changes from child to adult. You move from playing the games of children to the role plays of adults. And another rite of passage is marriage. So there you change your status from being single to married. So a ceremony is held to signify that passage. And from that moment, you start playing the role of wife or husband in the role play of family relations. So then, a funeral is also a rite of passage. It's the rite of passage for that transition, that moment when we die. You pass from the state of being alive to the state of being dead, or from living in this world to living in the next world, or from being a living person to being an ancestor. So we have a funeral ceremony for that passage. The anthropologists Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner have conceptualized rites of passage as having 3 stages. So first of all, you have the separation stage, during which the participants leave their previous state or roles. And then you have the transition or the liminal stage, in which the participants are betwixt and between. They're no longer what they used to be, but they have not yet acquired their new roles. And in the third stage is the reincorporation stage, in which the participants have acquired their new roles or they return to their normal roles. And so no matter the rite of passage, you'll always have these 3 stages. And there are also 2 aspects of a rite of passage. So first of all, when you go through a rite of passage, it's you yourself as an individual who goes through that change of roles. But secondly, the whole group also undergoes a change. So, for example, 30 days after the birth of a baby, in some cultures, there's a naming party or some kind of ceremony for the baby's birth. So what's the point of having a naming ceremony? Well, of course, one reason is to celebrate the birth and the survival of the baby after 30 days. Now, the rite of passage and the rituals often require a lot of preparation, which is supported by the participants and the members of the community. So there's a social dimension. People who come will support and encourage the event. And by inviting them to the ceremony, whether it's a birth ceremony, a marriage ceremony, or a graduation or a funeral ceremony, everyone becomes aware of and accepts the fact that you've undergone a major change. Now they know your new status. Now they know and recognize and accept the fact that you're a newborn member of the family, or that you're an adult. Or they now know and accept the fact that you're married. Or they now know and accept the fact that you're dead. As you've invited them to your marriage and they're part of the ceremony, everybody now gets used to and publicly accepts the idea that you're not single anymore and that you're married, and that you'll now be playing different roles. Or if it's the birth ceremony, they now know that you're no longer parents without children. They now know and accept that you have a child. So everybody will come and they'll accept, they'll acknowledge it, and they'll encourage it. So this is an important point for funerals as a rite of passage. Funerals help the family and friends to collectively accept the fact that one of their members is no longer there. There's nobody to play that role anymore. So they have to acknowledge and become aware of the fact that he or she has gone. And these changes will affect all the family relationships. When the baby comes in, or when one of the family members gets married, or when one member dies, the family relationships, the role plays, the social role plays are going to be changed. So in a rite of passage, everybody comes together, acknowledges the changes, and accepts that the relationships are changing. And so the rite of passage is a social thing. A funeral involves the reorganization of social relations. So let's say the grandfather died who was the patriarch of the family. So who's going to be the next person in authority? Who's going to play that role? The grandfather was the head and authority of the family, and after his death, those who are still alive have to accept that the eldest son who is now the one in charge. So that's an example in a patriarchal system, for example. So the social relations will be changed. The key point here is the importance of the social dimension of funerals as a rite of passage for both the living and the dead. Every culture has this important ceremony which ensures that the dead can properly move on to the next stage. When you have a high school or college graduation, you know that you have the responsibility of being an adult. You're no longer a child. Similarly, through the funeral, the dead now know that they're no longer alive and will move on to the next stage. So funerals are important for both the dead and the living. Seeing the funeral as a rite of passage, we can also think of our life as a series of stages that we go through. Even before we were born into this world, we went through the embryonic stage in our mother's womb. Then we went through stages of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and different stages of adulthood. And then we move into another stage, in which our body merges with the soil, our memory and legacy continue to live among the living, and perhaps our spirit progresses into another world.